Good morning, good day, good afternoon, everyone. I hope y'all are doing well. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about poetry. And we have 19 slides to go through. Don't worry, we're going to go through the slides rather quickly, so this should not take very long. But this is Poetry 101. This week, our focus is on poetry. We're going to be looking at some song lyrics later in the week, and we're really going to kind of jump into how a poem is structured and why you think maybe the author chose the structure they chose, and what's the meaning behind the poem and its structure. Okay, but first we've got to kind of go over what poetry is, what makes something a poem, and then we're going to look at a few different types of poems, right? And so I know what you guys are thinking. I've been teaching this long enough that I know that when you guys hear that word poetry, you're like, oh, I can picture it in my head right now, guys. Your eyes rolling back in the back of your heads. Mr. Forrest, poetry is boring. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But let's get started. Number one, what is poetry? So, according to Webster's dictionary, poetry is defined as metrical writing. Writing that formulates a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience and language chosen and arranged to create a specific emotional response to meaning, sound, and rhythm. That's a lot of words. What does that mean, Mr. Forrest? Well, to break it all down, poetry is basically a form of writing that uses lots of figurative language, imagery, simile, metaphor, personification. Those things where they really want to paint a mental image in your head. And they use this figurative language to, again, create an image in the reader's head. And the language is usually considered more beautiful or more musical than regular fictional writing, right? And it draws on emotions and feelings. The poet wants you to feel some sort of emotion after reading their poem, and it's a form of expression based on experiences. So basically, this long, crazy, confusing definition, this is what I want you to get from that. It's basically a form of writing that uses figurative language to express emotions and feelings. That's it broken down at its most basic form. So, you guys, we're on slide 5. I told you we're flying through this. So, poetry is meant to be performed. I just mentioned earlier that it's supposed to be musical. So, a couple weeks ago, we talked about Amanda Gorman, who performed one of her poems at the presidential inauguration. She also performed one of her poems at before the Super Bowl, but she performed them. She didn't just read them. It's a performance. And after you guys go through this presentation, you're going to be watching a performance of a poem and answering a question based on that performance. And you'll kind of see what I mean when I say it's meant to be performed. And so, because it's supposed to be more of a musical type performance, poems oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes have a specific rhyme scheme and rhythm. And we're going to talk about rhyme scheme and rhythm later on in this presentation. But again, Mr. Forrest, poetry is boring. I don't like it. I hate it. It's confusing. It's difficult to understand. Why can't they just come out and say it easily? You guys say you don't like poetry. Well, let me ask you this. Do you guys like music? Any genre? Rock, hip hop, country, blues, polka. I don't know what kind of music you like, but we all like music, right? Music is poetry. When you are listening to a song, right, it has a rhythm, it has a beat to it. You're listening to poetry. When you go and read the lyrics, you are reading a poem. When you sing along, you're performing a poem. So you guys say you don't like poetry, but you like music. So you actually do like poetry. So there are three main elements of a poem. There are three main things that make a poem what it is. Those are rhyme scheme, rhythm, and meter. And we're going to very quickly go over these three different elements. So number one, rhyme scheme. Rhyme scheme refers to the pattern in which the end rhymes of different poems match. Again, you're probably like, Mr. Forrest, that makes no sense. Well, let's look at this example on the right. This is called After Death by Christina Rossetti. It says, the curtains were half drawn, the floor was swept, and strewn with rushes, rosemary and may, lay think upon the bed on which I lay, where through the lattice ivy shadows crept. He leaned above me, thinking that I slept, and could not hear him, but I heard him say, poor child, and as he turned away, Came a deep silence, and I knew he wept. So I'm not going to read the entire thing, guys, but you see how we have letters over here, right? And so oftentimes to figure out the rhyme scheme, readers will put A by the first line, and then you'll see here. So swept, we put an A next to it. We see our last word in line 2 is May. Well, May doesn't rhyme with swept, so you have to put a B. But line 3, lay rhymes with May, so you'd put B again because those two rhyme. Line 4, our last word is crept. Well, crept rhymes with swept, which is our A, so we'd put A right here. Line 5, slept rhymes with crept, and so we put an A again. Line 6, say rhymes with lay and may, so we'd put B. So we have like an A, B, B, A type of rhyme scheme here. So the first and fourth lines rhyme, the second and third lines rhyme. A, B, B, A. So that's basically what rhyme scheme is. And this isn't the same rhyme scheme you're going to see in every poem. Different poems have different rhyme schemes. In fact, as you see, and I'm not going to read it, but later on in this poem, the rhyme scheme changes. So poems can have different rhyme schemes, within one poem. But the beginning of this is an A, B, B, A rhyme scheme. So when you're trying to figure out rhyme scheme, look at the last word or words throughout and see, hey, in which lines do these words rhyme with words in other lines? So again, A, lines 1 and 4 rhyme, lines 2 and 3 rhyme. So A, B, B, A. And it's just the pattern in which words rhyme. Next is rhythm. Rhythm refers to the beat of the poem, created by the use of strong and weak syllables. And it's what gives poetry its musical quality. Okay? So, again, this is why so many people consider music poetry, because music has a beat, it has a rhythm, and poetry has a rhythm or beat as well. So, example 1, focus on the rhythm here. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. You see how that rhythm is kind of more fast paced? And oftentimes with rhythm, guys, you can clap it out. So we romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. So you see how I have more of a fast paced rhythm to my clapping that goes along with the words? That's rhythm. And this is something that just takes practice, guys. You're not going to get this on the very first try. It takes practice. So example 2, I'm going to clap it out again. It says, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. So it's still a more of an upbeat rhythm. It's a little bit slower than our first example, but it's still upbeat, but it follows this same rhythm or beat pattern. And so again, that just kind of comes with practice as you read poetry, figuring out kind of what is the author's rhythm here in this poem. But it's based off of the use of strong and weak syllables, where I put my emphasis. And guys, we're really, this is more of a general overview. We're not going to really focus much, not too much on beat and rhythm. I'm not going to on a test say, hey, what's the rhyme scheme here? Or is this rhythm upbeat or is this rhythm slow, right? I'm not going to ask you that, but this is just kind of explaining to you the different elements of poetry. And the last element of poetry is meter. And meter is a little bit more confusing, right? Meter and it's similar to rhythm, but it refers to the pattern and number of strong and weak syllables in a poem. And the meter helps create the poem's rhythm, and it also helps create the poem's mood. So I'm going to read a line, or a stanza, from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, okay? And I want you guys to tell me or you can't really tell me because this is pre-recorded, but ask yourself, is this rhythm or is this meter, is it kind of happy? Is it kind of dark and gloomy? What do you guys think? So here we go. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary. So I'm going to read that again. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary. So you see I'm putting emphasis on certain words, on certain syllables and sounds, and it makes this stanza or these lines more dark and gloomy. And if you know anything about Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven, you know that it is a very dark, gloomy, depressing poem. As opposed to if I read it like this: once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, right? That meter doesn't sound right. It doesn't flow. It doesn't, make sense, right? That's more of a happy, upbeat meter. That doesn't make sense, right? And so you really have to figure out what syllables or what word sounds is the author putting his or her emphasis on. And from that, you can figure out the poem's rhythm and then the poem's mood or the tone of the poem. And again, I'm not going to be asking you guys about meter. As you guys get into high school and you focus more on poetry, you'll learn more about that later on. So last but not least, we're going to look at a few types of poetry. And at the end of the week, guys, you guys are going to be able to choose one of these and write your own poem. And I'm going to give you a website that's going to help you do that later in the week. But let's do a general brief overview of these types. And these are not all the types of poetry. There are different types. These are just some of the main ones that I want us to touch on really quickly. So number one, you have a ballad. And a ballad is a poem that tells a story, usually in 4-line stanzas called quatrains. So you see how it's broken up here into basically 4 paragraphs. So in regular writing, whether it be nonfiction or fiction, things are broken up into paragraphs. Well, in poetry, we don't call those things paragraphs. We call them stanzas. So when you hear that word stanza, just think of it as poem's version of a paragraph, right? And so a ballad usually has 4-line stanzas. So as you can see, I got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines here, 4 lines in stanza 2, 4 lines in stanza 3, and then again, 4 lines in stanza 4. And these stanzas are called quatrains when it comes to a ballad, and it tells a story. So I'm not going to read this, guys. I really wanted to show this to show you how it's broken up. But just think a ballad usually has 4-line stanzas, and it's something that tells a story. Next, we have an ode. And an ode is usually a classical poem written with lots of emotion. And it's usually meant to praise someone or something. So here it says, "Oh, glorious spring, how amazing you are. You are both truth's beauty and light. You travel far and yet always remain bright. Baby lambs greet you with a bleat. Birds fly stretching their wings." So in this ode, the author is praising springtime. He is happy that spring has arrived, and he is shouting his praises to the skies, thankful that it is finally spring. So if you read a poem and they're praising something or someone, chances are you're reading what's called an ode, and it's pronounced ode, not odie or not ode. It's pronounced ode. Number 3, free verse. As the name suggests, free verse is a poem that is free from any limitations. It does not have a regular rhythm, nor does it have a regular rhyme scheme. So you're not going to have that A, B, B, A rhyme scheme in a free verse poem. It's not going to rhyme. I was not happy with the rain until my eyes caught 5 wet leaves, a mysterious autumn watercolor gift here on this broken road. So you see that there's no rhyming words in this poem, nor is there any sort of rhythm, right? It's just kind of short and choppy and broken up. That's free verse, as the name suggests. Next, we have a lyric or a lyrical poem. And this is a shorter poem in which emotions are expressed through musical language. It's usually written in the first person point of view, so it uses words like I, my, and it usually expresses thoughts or inner feelings. So this is an example of a lyric poem from the famous poet Emily Dickinson. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness round my form was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes beside had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering sure, for what last onset when the king be witnessed in his power. So again, first person, she's saying I, and she's talking about her thoughts, right? Her inner workings, her inner being. She's not talking about what she sees. She's not talking about, nature or what's out in public. She's talking about her inner thoughts. And so that is what makes it a lyric poem. We have 3 more. Next is a narrative poem. And a narrative poem tells a story. It'll have characters, it'll have a setting, it'll have a plot. They're usually quite long, so I didn't put an entire example here on the screen. And there's usually one speaker who's telling the story. So again, we already talked about Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, but if you read The Raven, it is a long poem. And many people get it confused with, just a regular fictional story because A, it's long, but B, it tells a story, it has characters, setting, plot, but it is in fact a poem. It has a rhythm and it has a specific rhyme scheme throughout. These last 2 are easy. Shape poem, it's written, and the way it's written or typed out creates a shape. This poem is about someone getting a baby sister, and so he wrote the poem. Oh, moving it around. He wrote the poem into the shape of a child. That's why it's called shape poem. And then lastly is an acrostic poem. And this is where the first letter in each line spell out a word. So this poem is about a rainstorm or bad weather or it raining. And as you can see, each first line spells out the word rainstorm. So guys, that is a very brief, very general overview of poetry. What I want you guys to do now is go in and watch the video for your discussion board and answer the discussion board question. And I will see you guys later.